Welcome to the Holy Rebellion. Welcome to the Holy Rebellion. Glad you're here with me. Let's start the rebellion.
I'm super excited for this. I love chatting with you. And so it's fun that I get to chat with you in real life, not actually just in the jiu-jitsu world.
All right, stopped recording, but here we go. Now it's recording again.
There you go.
Yeah, so Trey and I know each other from jiu-jitsu. He beats me up most mornings, and then we kind of became friends and he tried to get me swole, which has not worked very well, but we made some progress, a little bit of progress.
You've gotten stronger, some good tendon strength.
We made some progress. Yeah, got some good tendon strength. So I'd introduce you, but I think you'll do a better job. I'd rather fill in the holes. So would you just give me like quick chapter titles, tell me a little bit about yourself, and then I'll throw in the fun stuff that you don't mention?
Yeah, I'm just a guy that likes to do things. Really though, I feel like I have ADD when it comes to most things. So like I've started a bunch of different little businesses. I've done a bunch of little mini careers, and I'm just always excited and looking for new fun opportunities, especially when it's something that's like going to push me or something that's hard that I haven't done before. I think most people want to stick in their comfort zones of things that they just keep doing, but I get really excited when there's something new that I've never done that I get to tackle, which my wife hates because I'm always trying out something new. And she's like, can't you just pick one thing? And I can't.
You can't do it. You just can't quit.
No.
Yeah. So about every quarter, it's probably more frequent than that, but about every quarter, Trey comes in and says, "Hey, I'm doing this new business. I got this new thing on the side." He's doing. But it's fun. I think one of the things I actually really admire about you is that you have the capacity to do all of those things, and I don't. It's like if I don't just do one thing, if I start to split my focus, I just fall to pieces. But you're able to jump from thing to thing, and you seem to do it all really well.
Well, I think I've just tricked you. Outward appearances can be deceiving, but yeah, I try my best.
Oh, good. Well, so at kind of the lens we see, or that I see the world from, or that I've been looking at it recently, is that we create this faith hierarchy, and faith just being things that we believe in and follow. So, for example, I have faith in my wife, and I believe and follow her over some bum in the street. And so then in our lives, we have this faith hierarchy that is created with things we follow above other things. And at the very top of that list, what we'll follow and believe and sacrifice for above everything else, I think that's what we worship. And so kind of we'll just dive right into the deep end here. So what is at the top for you? What is it that you worship, Trey?
That's a really great question. When you put it that way, like things that actually influence you, I instantly, like, my knee-jerk reaction was just like, I listened to my mom specifically and my father-in-law, my mother-in-law, because I just think they're like the best examples. And it's funny because everything they always say and mention, like, I feel like if you're reading the scriptures, especially the Book of Mormon, you see like Lehi, he's always giving his talks to his children. And I feel like I have one of those from them at least like once a month. So maybe I should start paying more attention. But so I would like to be like, I think I worship Christ and church and all of that kind of stuff, but which I definitely do. And I believe in that. But I think one thing is I really take a lot of influence and advice from my parents, both my mom, my stepdad, and my in-laws, because they've just been such great examples, and they both have done incredible things. And I think it's really easy to just listen to their influences and go from there. So that's probably my first source of things that I follow. The other things are, I really just run by the beat of my own drum, to be honest. Like if I look at the things that I listen to the most, like I listen to a variety of different podcasts. But like, I think a lot of things I look at are just like, what do I really want to do in each day that starts? And I kind of run from there. I was actually having a really interesting conversation this last Saturday with Jeff Kirkham. So he wrote a book, and now it's a movie just released called Homestead. It's actually really great. Yeah,
Seen
it
the
comes out
billboards. I
on.
have no idea what it's about.
You should go see it. It's on. It comes out December 20th. But yeah, I've seen it, and he was in the military, constantly deployed. I think for like 15 years almost straight, he was deployed in his 25-year career. And he talks about the things that made him more successful than the majority of most deployed service members. And what successful means to him is he never had a serious injury and never, it doesn't have like any PTSD. And he was constantly deployed and in battle, like every day. Like he was doing missions pretty much daily when he was
Yeah.
there and was in conflict. And one of the things he pinned most was, whether people believe in this or not, is his daily routine. And one of the key things of his routine was prayer. And he was just like, I don't know if you guys are LDS, but if you are, the way the LDS prayer is structured is just scientifically proven to awaken the different factors in your brain to really help you be successful. So you go through and you express gratitude, which calms you down and instantly releases like I guess it's like serotonin. I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
not a medical professional, but it releases those good feeling chemicals in your brain. And then you go through and you ask for things or that you're struggling with or things you might want help with. But then you visualize being successful in that thing with God's help. So you are like visualizing your success in the thing that you're struggling with, and you're believing you can be successful in that. And you're going to do everything in your power to be successful in it. And then at the end, pretty much always you say, not my will, but thy will be done, or you're accepting to God's will. So you're going to do everything you can, but at the end of the day, whatever the outcome is going to be, you're already determining that you're going to be okay with it. And then, which is just another source of like gratitude as well. And then you end in the name of Jesus Christ, amen. And it just really, I've seen that in my life, how it's been just really good to visualize what I actually want and then remember the things that I'm actually grateful for. And I think as I've been able to do that and listening to my parents' advice to return to your original question, I think that's really helped me and been like my compass throughout my whole lifetime.
Yeah. And I'll ask you a specific question, but I'll give you a second to think about it. Has there been a time when you've experienced that prayer helping you, aiding you in some way? And I'll give you a second because I had a thought. Have you ever read another question just to muddle this? Have you ever read Highly Effective Habits or Seven? What is that? You know, the Stephen Covey book.
7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
That one. Yeah. What's interesting there is, as you were saying that, it's like those are a couple of the principles that Stephen Covey talks about. So he's like taking these prayer principles and then making them into a business practice and making money off of it, which is great. Like, I think that's actually what most people end up doing. Is they take a little portion of something that Jesus taught and they're like, hey, if we just use this towards business, it actually works this way too. But
Well,
visualizing
that's the funny
success.
thing is people, I hear this knock on the LDS church a lot where they're like, the LDS church has so much money, one of the richest organizations in the world. And then they'll go through and knock a bunch of things that they don't like about the LDS church. And I'll be like, it just make me think to myself, like, yeah, like there are a lot of imperfect people in the church, in the world in general. But isn't it crazy that the church is so successful, if not only looking through a financial lens, in
Yeah.
spite of all these imperfect people? Like, wouldn't that mean that that should be God's church? The fact that it is so well ran, like, wouldn't that
They're
show that
true principles.
someone at the top's running it that's smarter than all these terrible people you just mentioned? And I put terrible in quotation marks.
Yeah.
But I think that's always just such an interesting point that like the principles aren't just like gospel principles. I think they're universal principles for happiness. And if they're applied, they help. And I think like to your question of like, where's prayer affected me positively? I mean, it's hard for me to pinpoint just like one specific time because I think it's just a continuous thing where I'll feel like doing as many things as I do, I feel like I'm constantly on a roller coaster of stress where I'm always really, really stressed, but it's just is depending on how stressed, just depends on the day. But what I found is even like in the days where it's like, I just have no idea, because there's been many months, and my wife hates this, but there's been many months where I'm like, I have all these bills, thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, paychecks that need to be paid, and invoices that need to be paid. Just everything's piling up. And I'm like, I
You're
don't
making
know.
me stressed, man.
Yeah. I don't know how I'm going to pay for all this stuff. I don't know. Like, I don't have any sales or enough sales in the pipeline to cover this. And so there's been a ton of moments like I wish it's like, oh, that happened one or two times. It's literally happened sometimes for months on end where it just is like miracle after miracle after miracle. But it's when those times I can actually like kneel down and think and just like go through the things that I am grateful for and the successes and the wins and the things that are going positively, then I'm like, I don't have it bad at all. Like I'm one of the most blessed people I've literally ever met. And it's either like I'm blessed or I'm just extremely lucky. And then I'll go into like, look at the challenges that I'm facing. And almost always I come up with, I, a thought comes to mind where I'm able to see like a path forward and move forward in a good way. And so I think there's just too many times like that to count where I've been like, oh, like what are the hardest times? I've had many hardest times, I feel like. And
Yeah.
that one that really like is easy for me to point to is I think everyone needs to have their own hero's journey. And you need to look at yourself as the hero of your own story. And I think there's way too many people that go through life and they play it safe and they go get a corporate job that's super comfortable. Might make a decent income and whatever that might be to them. I find that's always relative, but they'll work a 9 to 5. They spend the majority of their life working and they spend a few weekends and holidays with their family and then they hang it up. But when the end of the day comes, they never really lived out that true dream, whatever it might have been. And I just think there's too many people that do that, and they just don't see themselves. Maybe they're a part in someone else's story, but they don't see themselves as the hero of their own story. And I think as you do that, and I think that's what Christ wants. Like I think that's what the whole goal is that you become your own hero of your own story, but looking for help and guidance from someone who's done it a million times, billions, trillions of times, who knows way better than you. And like by doing that, it just gives me the confidence where I'm like, it doesn't matter what I want to do. There's someone there on my team that's been through it before that's going to help show and guide the way. And I don't have to like stress as much. I just have to go do what I'm passionate about. And if I give 110%, what's the worst case scenario? I don't have any money. Like you can always find food. You can always find what you need. And I mean, hey, you can miss a few mortgage payments if you need to. Luckily, I've never had to. I've never even been close to losing any of like my real estate or anything like that. But what is the worst case scenario? And it really isn't that bad.
I Yeah, I actually had a similar experience. So I did sales, commission only sales for like the first half of my career, and I wasn't successful. You killed it. I know you did really well, and I did not. I was the exact opposite. We were like just out of poverty every single month, and it was rough. But I remember that a very similar experience. I would pray, and every single time I prayed, like every single prayer for like 6 or 7 years, it was, Heavenly Father, please help me to provide for my family this month. Because I felt that weight. And I look back and we were never hungry. I never missed any payments. I was stressed all the time. I felt that weight a lot. But I just think that's like success leaves clues. And there's a true principle in prayer. There's something about it that is miraculous in nature. And I think that if we lean on God, we actually will have everything that we need. It doesn't always look like what we want it to look like, but we're still
That's
here.
because I think people have a certain expectation of how they want things to play out. And
Yeah.
then they get disappointed when things don't pan out the exact way that they wanted to. But like if I look back, I had all these goals that I wanted to accomplish, and most of them didn't pan out how I would have hoped. But like in hindsight, as I look to where I am now, at the age I'm at now and with my family, I mean, I'm living the life I always dreamed of. But it's really easy to get distracted and look at other ways, and you're like, I guess it's always wanting more or wanting something different. But then as you go look back, you're like, well, when I started out when I was 21 and where I wanted to be at this age, like I'm doing that. And so that's, I think, one thing that always makes me just feel good is I'm like, yeah, I'm there regardless of what that looks like. Now everything else is just playing Monopoly.
Yeah. And that is a game that tears families apart. So don't play with that one for too long. So I've actually struggled with this one for a long time, Trey. Maybe you can help me out. So I one of the ways I think that we have in common is that we both dream big and we're fairly ambitious. But I think I dream so big that uh, I'm chronically disappointed. Like I never hit where I want to hit. I think it sends me a good direction. So there's pros and cons to that, but I don't know how to really set a goal without always falling. Like I don't know how to make it realistic, you know? And we're coming up on the new year. It's something I've been thinking a lot about. And you brought up goals, and I just like I don't really know how to do that well. How do you do that?
Well, I don't know if I've ever set a realistic goal, to be honest.
So maybe you don't need a realistic
I
goal.
I don't know if I've ever actually achieved like a numerical goal, to be brutally honest. And I mean, I know that sounds bad, probably, but I was talking to my brother once, and we did door-to-door sales together, and we would always set these goals and plan big for the next year. He was one of my team leaders for like 6 years, and when he was leaving, he was like, "It's kind of wild. Like we've literally failed at this." And I'm like, "That's pretty good to fail, though." And that's the thing is like, I think if you plan big and you do everything in your power. So I'm a big believer of like, you have your goals, but then you divide them up into action plans. So like you have like, what is your goal? So it might be like, you want to make whatever, $100,000, I don't know, $200,000, $1,000,000, doesn't really matter. But whatever that goal might be, and I'm just using this as an example. And so what I like to do is piece up, okay, for me to make $1,000,000, what am I going to have to do this year in order to make that happen? And I'll go through and look at like whether it's one of my companies or sales or whatever, and I'll go piece it out and build backwards and be like, okay, so today, what do I have to do every single day or on a week? Because sometimes your days, it's a little bit uncontrollable, some things that happen, but on a week, you should really be able to hit your week. And then on a month, if you're not hitting your months, then you're in a bad place.
Yeah.
And so I'll do everything I can to hit my week goal and my month goal. And I'll have specific things that I'm supposed to do, whether like if I'm trying to do sales, for example, and it's door to door, am I knocking on X amount of doors? Because I know if I knock on 10 doors, I'm going to sell at least one person. So if I want to sell 10 in a day, I'm going to have to knock on 100 doors. And if I do that every single day for sure, then I'll be able to hit my goal. And I'll break it down that way. And usually my goals make me push myself a little bit or a ton and almost inhuman feats. And I'll tell my wife and she's like, so you think you're going to do that? And I'm like, yeah, why not? And anyways.
Because she's realistic.
Yeah, she's the brains to the operation. I'm just the brawn. And so I think when you're coming down to your goals, you break them down in action plans and things like a checklist. Like, did you wake up at 6 a.m.? Did you knock on 100 doors? Did you make 100 phone calls? Did you do whatever that you can actually check off of a list? And as you do that, no matter what happens, you're going to see some big wins. And so that's what's been wild is I did this vision board when I was like 24, 25 of what I wanted to accomplish by 40. And I know it's like actually like 23, but I accomplished it at like 25, 26. Everything I wanted to do was by 40, which was wild. And it was just like more like objective types of things. Like I wanted to have this type of car, live in this type of house, do these certain types of activities. And it was wild to see that I didn't have to make nearly as much money as I thought I would to have actually achieved those things. I was just focused on doing those things and I was able to actually do them without going into debt.
Yeah,
or
that's awesome.
Debt, just with a normal mortgage, I guess. But that's where I think when it comes to setting goals is just doing something that you can check off.
Yeah, the little bite-sized pieces. Yeah, one of the things I often think about, because this has been my experience, and it sounds like yours as well, that my plans often fall apart so that God's plan can fall into place. I think he's leading us a good direction. And oftentimes when I set goals, I'm trying to think, okay, God, what is it that I need to do? And I think I'm off all the time, but in some roundabout way, I'm zigzagging the right direction. I'm headed the right direction. At least I hope I am. That's where it feels like it's been going.
No, 100%.
So going back to that, like the visualization of the ladder, we talked about this a little bit. What are the principles or the other rungs in the ladder that point you to God? You mentioned your family, parents, in-laws, and prayer. So, quick example: some of the principles that I think are grounding for me and point me to God are like Jocko Willink's extreme ownership. I try to practice that. I actually think that's a gospel principle. And Jordan Peterson's be honest and shoulder responsibility. And I think that's just another way to say carry your cross. But I try to live by those principles and they point me to God. What would be the principles that orient your life?
Well, I think one of the biggest ones is, I mean, I do love extreme ownership as well. Like there's just way too many victims today. And I think that's actually been one of the biggest destroyers of people's faith is they don't take ownership over their own belief in themselves and in God in general. They just put it all outwards outside of themselves. And I think that's one of the things that's decaying our society as a whole is people aren't willing to look inward and say, hey, it all lies with me. It's all on my shoulders. And if I need help, there's someone else there to help me. So I think that's probably the biggest. And one part of that is, as you see, like I was mentioning earlier, people want to blame outside things, whether it's the church or whoever, for whatever's happening. And it's crazy to me. I just think about this a lot lately, like just like this week, is how tribal we are as humans, how we want to fit in, how we want to be accepted in some type of group. And then when that group that we were tied to does something we don't understand or whatever it might be, it's really easy to just do everything opposite of that group or like say that's all wrong or whatever it might be. And I think we're just all so focused on the group, whether that's a political party, a church, a team, whatever. It's really easy to point fingers and say, well, they're doing this wrong. So everything negative that happened in my life is because of this person specifically bad teaching that's a part of this group, whatever it might be. Whereas
Yeah.
I feel like everything is individual. Like, I think it's important to have a sense of community and work with others and be involved with others and be service oriented. But I think that helps you as the person more than anything. And I think if you take responsibility of your own relationship with God, with your wife, with your friends, with your business, with your job, with your kids, and it's all on you, I think it becomes a lot more manageable. And to me, it's a lot happier. It's like, yeah, it really is whatever I decide it to be. If I want to have a great relationship with someone that doesn't like me, that might be a little bit of a challenge, but I'm only going to measure our relationship based off the output that I give to them and not necessarily of the inputs that they're putting into me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the way I've heard it is if you're a victim, you'll repeatedly create victimizers. Like you'll just put yourself in that position over and over and over again. And I love that analogy where you were talking about you're the main character of your story. And we often think that we're not in the driver's seat, but you're a great example of that. I've seen you drive.
I'll try.
You,
I'm a pretty terrible driver. It's kind of crazy, and that's kind of how my life goes too. So I would say, yeah, I agree with you on a lot of things you mentioned. The other big things I think are integrity. And some people tell me sometimes I'm too honest, especially with like business stuff. Some of my businesses, they're like, you're the only person to just come in and just lay it all out on the table like this. And I mean, investors love it, I guess. But yeah, I just think like living just with full transparency. And it's just that one is really relieving. So it's not like you have any secrets to hide. Like everything's just out there in the
yeah,
open, which is nice. And then the last thing is just discipline. And how I think of it is just really simply is if there's something you need to do, you just do it now. Like most people don't want to do the hard things, but I think as Mike Tyson has said is discipline's just doing the things you don't want to do like you love it. And what I think of that is I just do it as fast as I can. If I'm excited about something, I'm going to do it right then. And so if there's something that needs to get done, I'll just do it literally right then. So I think those
I
are kind of my rungs. I'm a pretty simple guy.
I like the integrity, ownership, and what was the last one? And
Discipline.
discipline. And discipline. Yeah, by the way, Trey is at the gym every single day and then does jujitsu every single day and then plays his football leagues.
The-
And he wins sometimes, almost gets MVP every now and then.
Yeah,
Eh,
usually win.
Yeah.
I think I only have had one loss in the last couple
Really?
weeks.
Hey, man.
Yeah.
He's
So
also the most humble guy I know.
yeah, I am same most humble guy I know as well. That's my list.
Um, uh, can you tell us about a time that perhaps your faith was challenged?
Yeah, I mean, I think early on in my marriage, not anything to do with like marriage issues or anything like that, but I was super busy. So I was like 25. Um, I'd been off my mission for 4 or 5 years, and I was just opening a brand new office. So I'd just gotten married, and it was new. Then we'd go out to do summer sales, open a new office, had a ton of new reps, biggest office I'd ever managed, most people I'd ever managed in a new market. Nothing was set up in place. Um, and it just was a really, really hard time. And I don't think it was like I really struggled, because I don't know if I've really ever struggled with like, do I believe in God or anything like doubting? But I think I just like got so busy that I just forgot like to do a lot of different stuff. And I just became like a really challenging time because I was gone from like 7 a.m. till like 10, 11 p.m. at night.
All day.
My wife, we're in a new city, San Antonio. She didn't know anybody. She didn't have any friends. She
That's
worked
rough.
part-time at a job that she didn't really fit in like with the other people. Like it's not that she didn't fit in. That sounds kind of lame, but she just like didn't click with the other people she worked with, like in terms of morals and values and just like things they like to do. And so she was just alone all the time. So there's a lot of like hard things, at least for me, it was like a really challenging time. And so I think, yeah, that it just wasn't, not that I was doing anything bad, but I just was focused on a lot of other things. And I kind of let the world pile up on me. And I ended up having like a pretty rough summer, one of the least successful summers I'd ever had. And it was pretty hard. So I think coming out of that, it was a great lesson of priorities and prioritizing like things that are important and how to actually handle a lot of things, especially when everything goes wrong. And I took that and was able to learn from it for the next, I think I sold for 4 or 5 more years after that, and then ran the program for the company for 3 years. And I think that I was able to take lessons from that that helped prioritize what things were most important to ultimately drive success in the future, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So if you had to sit down and tell somebody going through a similar experience, what kind of advice would you give them?
Well, it's the same questions I think you just asked. Is like, where are those things that are most important to you? Like, where, like, you just asked, like, what my most influential things were. But, like, what are, when you, like, look at the book of Christian or whatever, the book of Valdez, and you open it up, like, what are those chapters and what is important and what do you want that story to tell? And go write that down. Like, do you want to say, like, people will think about you or you to think about yourself? Like, yeah, I really believed in God and looked for direction. And I was like focused on my eternal destiny, or were you focused on making a ton of money or whatever it might be? Like, I can't determine what your success is. So tell me, what do you think what's your definition of success? And go list it out. I mean, if I see something, I'm like, I don't know if that's going to make you happy. Like, I don't think
Yeah.
money makes you happy, to be honest. And so I'd be like, well, what's going to actually make you happy? What brings you joy? And then prioritize that. And then as you do, what else is fun for you? And then go do those things. And then what actually helps you in your success? And I'll give them my 2 cents. And I think for me, it's never been a question of if like the LDS church has been true, because I think that rests just in one thing. And a lot of people like to focus on a lot of different areas of the church. And I think the only thing that matters to me is like, did the priesthood keys get passed to Joseph Smith or not? Like, is the authority of the church there within the church? Yes or no? And I think it's something everyone has to figure out for themselves. And for me, I've just never really doubted that. And so that's been easy. And so I've been able to look at like, okay, what things do prophets do or people that are successful do within the church? They pray, they believe in Christ, they look for like towards his example, they try to be like him every day. They don't get swayed. They're not Pharisees or Sadducees. They just focus on the true gospel and go try to align and live like Christ's example. And that's it. And so like, how can I do that? And then right my ship. and try to steer that direction.
Yeah, to illustrate that point, I recently read Endurance. Have you read that book yet?
No, I haven't.
So it's about oh, I forget their names, but one of the gentleman who wanted to be the first to reach the I think it was the North Pole. See, it's been a couple of weeks, but he's trying to reach one of the poles. It was probably the South Pole. So they like sail down and they have a horrific experience where they get stuck in the ice. Their ship does, and then the ice just crushes it. So they're living on the ice, and then the ice starts to melt. So they're gonna like die and fall into the water. So they hop into these lifeboats and row for 5 days without food or sleep to this island that is just brutal, wind and snow and ice and water all the time. So like it's not really shelter. And then they send a couple of guys off to the southern tip of Georgia, which is this really long, it's like 500-mile trip across the water to get there. And this is in the early 1900s, I believe. And so they don't have GPS. They're using sextants, which is like black magic to me. I don't understand how it works, but somehow they have this instrument where they look up at the stars, they use this sextant, and they can say, okay, we're here, we're headed this direction. So it's magic. But I love that it's to illustrate that point is if it's cloudy, if they can't see the stars, they're screwed. If they don't look up, they're screwed. And so constantly they have to look up, which I think is the same direction we have to look. You got to look up, and we do that through prayer and reorient the direction we're heading with where we're headed, which ultimately is up. And so I try to think of it that way, where it's like, am I headed the direction? Am I doing the things that are going to get me to where I want to go? So constantly reorienting my life towards that higher goal. So a good book, really sad, but it had some good stuff in it.
No, I think I have heard of this story before. And I mean, that's the key. I think that's important. I think that's a great life lesson to take. Like, how do you, because I think you're always really good at this. I like focusing on the things that matter and prioritizing your life. What helps you do that?
Yeah, that's a good question. One of the things, like you mentioned that money doesn't make you happy, and or like it's not going to make you feel successful ultimately. That can't be the end point.
Yeah,
And I
definitely
write,
but you don't get
yeah,
happy from being like, I have a bunch of zeros in my bank account, which it does help. People that say that money can't help you be happy, they probably just haven't made enough money
they
yet.
haven't been poor,
Yeah, or
poor
they have
enough.
never been poor. That's probably better. Yes.
Yeah, no, if you're
So,
poor enough, you realize like money solves all of your money issues. And turns out
okay.
that's quite a bit. And it's much easier to be wealthy than it is to be poor because it just, there's all this crap you don't have to deal with. And the stress level you don't have to deal with. But it really comes back to this idea. And I was listening to Jordan Peterson talk about this, and he talks about, he calls it, I think it was a value hierarchy, which is probably the seed from where this idea came from. But he says, that I'm talking to these kids at school, I tell them to write an essay and they think, okay, I'm going to write an essay to get an A. And he's like, that's not what it is. You're typing, you're putting your finger to the key to push a button, to make a word, to make a sentence, to make a paragraph, to make a paper, to get a grade to what? And then it's just like you progressively shoot that out further. Why do you want the grade? I want the grade so I can get a good job. Okay, great. Why do you want a good job? I want a job so I can make good money. And I think we don't often think past that point. It's like, I want to make good money. Well, what are you going to do with that money? Why do you want to make good money? And then it's for me, it's like, because I just want to provide for my family. And then it increases my scope of influence. So now I can influence a greater amount of people and help a greater amount of people. And why do I want to do that? And I've been thinking a lot about that recently. I was in the temple. I just read a book. It's called How Will You Measure Your Life? By William Clayton, some Harvard business guy. He was actually a member of the church, but ultimately he talks about how he will measure his life and how he came to that conclusion. And so I sat and thought a lot about that. What is the metric by which I will measure my life? And I was in the temple thinking about that, and I opened the Book of Mormon, and it fell open to it's like early Alma 11, and it was the story of Ammon. And Ammon, to summarize really quickly, was a missionary who went to a ferocious and bloodthirsty people to preach the gospel. And they like immediately throw him in prison as soon as he shows up. He goes in front of the king, and the king actually really likes him. He's like, hey, you want to marry one of my daughters? And he's like, no, I'll just be your servant. It's like, okay. So he sends him out to the flock, and it turns out that there are some robbers who come to steal them. So they scatter the flock so they can steal them. And last time this happened, the king killed all the servants. And so the servants are just distraught. And was like, hey, no, it's cool. We'll just go gather the flock. So they gather the flock. The robbers see this, they come back. And so now Ammon, brave guy, stands up and fights against these robbers. And he's hurling slings at him. He chops off some arms and kills a bunch of them. And that was the answer to my prayer. By what metric will I measure my life? The answer that came to me is gather and defend the flocks of the king. And to the degree that I can do that, I think I will feel successful. So then or every piece of my life, like my finances, if I'm getting money so that I can gather and defend the flocks of the king, then it has an end that matches something that will make me feel successful and joy. So long answer to your question, but I like recently came to this. It was kind of fun.
Well, I think that's what people have to get to is just like where do they find their vision and their true success? And if like they could write their book, what would the ending be? And what would they be like? Christian was what? The gatherer of the sheep. You know what I mean? Like what were you? And I think that's something that's been something that I've been trying to think about a lot lately. And I think that's great. I think that's a great answer.
Have you come to a conclusion?
I don't know. Like right now, I think one of the biggest things that's been shocking to me is just kind of the state of leadership, but also the people willing to follow leadership. And I think that's one of the things that's kind of cancerous to our society, whether like it's just like here in Utah or nationally, is people are very quick to just follow whoever's the leader without asking any questions and having like a direct answers for themselves on like what the right path may or may not be. So when like the leader says to do something that maybe we don't agree with, a lot of the people don't even know because they're just like, oh yeah, they're the leader. They must know. Let's follow them. So one thing I've been super passionate about lately is just helping get out the information so people can make decisions for themselves, whether that's with things that are going on locally or federally, and really help hold accountable some of these leaders. But more than the leaders, help people be accountable to themselves and the fact that they can make good decisions, that they are capable, that they can do things for themselves, so they don't need to be directed all the time. So I think that's one thing that I've been really, really passionate about lately is how can I help people really become their own guiding person? Because I think that's the way it was always meant to be, is you can look and pray. You have all the tools you need at your disposal to get the information for yourself. And so you should dictate what that looks like, not be just so quickly to follow someone else.
How are you doing that?
So, I mean, I have my podcast that I've been doing. I've been doing social media stuff. I've been going to a lot of events, getting plugged in locally and a little bit federally, and just figuring out who the major players are in general, and then just connecting with people that have good influence and then going from there. So that's really one thing I'm passionate about, is really helping the right people get elected, the right people get into the right leadership roles, so that way people can actually succeed and we can flourish as a people, but also as individuals.
Yeah, man, I love that. So while you're doing all of that, if you're anything like me, there are always distractions, and to put it in spiritual terms, there are other gods that demand that you worship them. Well, what things vie for your attention, or that you prioritize your faith over them?
Well, I just say it's like my other hopes and dreams. Like I still live in this imaginary land where I could still be a professional athlete. So it's like, okay, I'm still training all the time. Like I train multiple hours a day, whether that's doing MMA, jiu-jitsu, or just strength and conditioning training. That requires a ton of time. I also want to be a great dad and be present, and just the same thing that I care about for other people, for them to know they're capable and competent and can do things for themselves. That's ultimately what I want to teach my kids, is that they are also capable and competent and able to do things for themselves. And the hard thing is there's only 24 hours in a day. And so it's like between doing my physical and imaginary land beliefs of being a pro athlete, whether that's playing football or doing MMA or playing whatever other sport I could think of, and working on my multiple businesses, or being a dad and a husband, that's my whole day every day. And I don't really watch TV or do anything else. It's really just that. And so, I think it's just trying to stay focused and grounded in that. And ultimately, like the sad thing is I need to carve out more. I'm like the least good example of someone in terms of like making enough time for the spiritual. Cause honestly, I'm not an overthinker. I don't really think that much about things. I just kind of have something in front of
You're a
me
doer.
I'm just, I just do. So I don't spend a lot of time in like the deep questions of the universe or honestly even studying scriptures or things like that, which I wish I did. Because I think that's super important and it's really essential to overall success. But for me, it's just as like, I'm just so focused on the here and now and what's going on and what's currently in front of me that um, before I know it, it's bedtime and I'm going and falling asleep. So I don't know if that makes sense. It's kind of a ramble, but
Oh, it's probably better to be a doer than just a thinker. I think most of us get stuck thinking so much that we never do. So there are worse things.
yeah, success is lost in the over planning.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes it's better to just get out there and make a mess and, hope
And
something
hopefully
works
something
out.
comes of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a perfect way of how I live my life.
You're out there making a mess. Well, it seems to be a good mess, and some of it seems to be shaping up real nice.
Yeah, I mean, I try my best. That's for sure.
Yeah. And we'll wrap up real quick, but is there a scripture or a scripture story that's been impactful to you over the years?
Well, it's funny because you literally brought up the one.
Amen.
And yeah, and when I just
Love that.
always think back because I think I'm a relatively prideful person and I love me probably the more most people should love themselves. Um, but I always reflect back on I think it's Alma 26 where Ammon's talking about how all the great things they've accomplished and
Yeah.
like how many things they've done since they've been there. And I think it's Aaron who's like, you shouldn't boast so much of yourself. And he kind of like chastises him for being like, I guess, just so excited about the things that they've been able to do. And I think Ammon has one of the best responses ever. He's like, I'm just really grateful for all the things we've been able to accomplish. And he said, it's not boasting of themselves, but all the glory goes back to God, or they're able to do like all things in God, something along those lines. He rejoices in God.
Yeah.
I think he actually says something like that. And I think that's really the key is like, I think we need to do have a sense of self-belief. I think we obviously need to be humble in the fact that we can recognize that we've been super blessed with things that happen that go well. But like Michael Jordan didn't become Michael Jordan because he was not thinking he was the greatest. People in sports talk about the Mamba mentality. Kobe didn't become Kobe because he thought that he couldn't accomplish whatever he wanted to accomplish. They believed in themselves and they believed they had all the tools to become and be whoever they wanted to be. And I think if we add in that piece that we do that in Christ or through revelation, then we become even stronger and even better and even more capable of accomplishing more things than just being a great athlete. We can be a great athlete, a great parent, a great business owner, a great friend, a great husband. And you're able to stretch yourself to whatever you need to be and whatever you want to be if you focus in the right places.
I love that. I think that we can be uber successful in all these areas and have those successes point back to God. And it's interesting you bring that up. I was thinking about that this morning. I was reading when Jesus comes down and visits the Nephites in 3rd Nephi, and he repeats the Sermon on the Mount essentially. But one of the things he says is, "Let your light so shine before the world that others may see your good works and glorify the Father who is in heaven." And it's like God wants you to be really successful. He wants you to just be this magnificent human being, and then in turn have you just say he's the guy, because you can be this conduit to point people back to God. And so, man, I just hope you're so successful. I hope that you just blow up every endeavor that you're in, and it does very, very well.
Thank you. Well, I'm one of your biggest fans. So I always love hearing the things that you're doing. So thanks
Stop.
for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man. So Trey, if people just can't get enough of you, how do they get more?
So you can find me on Instagram. I don't even know I think it's Trey Valdez 3, I think is my handle. Or you can find me at Vox Valdez Podcast on YouTube and Instagram. If you type my name into pretty much anything, Trey Jose Baldemar Valdez the third, you'll
That's
find
pretty
pretty much
specific.
anywhere. And so that's about it.
I actually, what's funny is I Googled you before this just to see, and it was like it was like one of the second or the third recommended searches was Trey and Meg Valdez. So I clicked on that one, and it was all of the pictures you and your wife have done together. By the way, they're also models on the side. But it just, yeah, you can find him anywhere. Just search his name, and he very unique face, very unique name. All right, man. Well, thanks for joining us.
Of course. Thank you.
Okay, we'll see you at jiu-jitsu.
See ya.
Thanks for joining this episode of The Holy Rebellion. We'll see you next week.